So Yom Kippur morning, here we are. It's 5783. This past year was 5782, and it has come to an end. On Rosh Hashanah, it ended 10 days ago. And that year was the 7th in a 7-year cycle called a Shemitah year. So there are 7 years in a cycle, and last year was the 7th. And in that year, the Torah tells us that we are to let the land rest. For 6 years, we can work the land, and on the 7th year, the Shemitah year, we are to let it rest. We can eat whatever grows. Actually, it's free for anyone to eat whatever grows during that year, but you can't work the land. You give the land a rest. And you do not plant it, and you do not work it. It is a do not year. And we are coming out of that year now into year 1 again. But as this year starts to leave us, it's important to think about what we can take from this last year of Shemitah, and what about the do not do it can we bring into our lives and really into our society and world at this time. We are in a spot, everybody. There's lots of things going on. I think we're probably all aware. I always think of like when I feel like the compounding amount of crises that are happening, I think like, did our ancestors think that? They must have, right? They were going through so much as well. And I take strength from that because they were able to make incredible changes to allow our world to continue, and we can too. And one of the blessings that the Jewish community has to offer are collective efforts to make our society better, to make our planet and heal our planet, is the incredible gift of do not do it. It's not the only thing that Jewish people offer, but that's one of the things we offer. Do not do it. We are in a prevailing culture of do it, more, all the time. Unlimited growth, a culture of excellence, the hubris of taking, accumulating, as an approach to material, to other humans, to our earth, to ourselves. Shemitah in this past year and our whole Jewish tradition tells us, hold on a second. There are times to stop all this doing. We need to remember and realign. The opening line of the University of Berlin Professor Byung-Chul Han's essay is a doozy. He says, what we now call growth is in reality random, cancerous proliferation. He continues, we are currently living through a frenzy of production and growth that seems like a frenzy of death. It is a simulation of vitality that conceals a deadly, impending catastrophe. This compulsion drives us toward not only ecological, but also mental catastrophe. We optimize ourselves to death. Relentless self-exploitation leads to mental collapse. Brutal competition ends in destruction. It produces an emotional coldness and an indifference to others, as well as to one's own self. Okay, that's an opening. It's a short but powerful essay. It's a powerful essay, and it gets even more intense from there. And in fact, for those of you who were there last night, part of where the essay goes to is that part of what's happening in our culture is a denial of death that leads to this production that ends up being death. There is a different way. We are in times where we need to draw on all the resources from our ancients in our past, all of our imaginings of the needs of those who are to come in the future, and all of the creativity and power of this moment in the present. Ancient cultures can, they don't always, but they can teach us about right relationship, how to acknowledge what is bigger than each of our individual lives, how to yield to boundaries, and to accept a profound no. A profound no containing a life-affirming yes. We need some profound no's in our society and in our world right now. And in Judaism, we have this to offer to these times. We happen to be masters of the profound no. One of the foundations of Jewish spiritual practice is the consciousness around not doing. We do, and also we don't do. We have conscious action, and we have conscious refraining from action. Actively not doing. I kept thinking of that Nike slogan, just do it. No, just don't do it. And in the reverse order than we usually think, in the Jewish tradition, it's often not doing that leads and then doing. Refraining is often where we begin, and then the doing. The rabbis of late antiquity who created and shaped Judaism out of their own crisis times, this new group calling itself the rabbis in late antiquity, came out of the destruction of the temple and the massive killing by the Roman Empire and the occupation. In their crisis times, the rabbis transformed our people and our practices and our ways to connect to God by their focus on bringing the sacred Torah into the daily living, everyday aspects of our lives, not only in the temple worship, which was now gone, but into our lives. The focus of the rabbinic imagination is what they called mitzvot, commandments, divine urgings. These are ethical, like give tzedakah, and ritual, like light the Shabbat candles. Within the 613, and yes, everybody has a slightly different list, but 613 mitzvot, there are what we call positive and negative commandments. The negative mitzvot are the things we're not going to do, and the positive mitzvot are the things we are going to do. And guess what? There's more of the negative ones. The Torah is filled with these instructions that the rabbis pulled out, and then the rabbis took their own holy journeys of thought and creativity to name additional mitzvot, and they loved the what not to do's, the profound no's. A moment ago, I gave some examples, like give tzedakah and light Shabbat candles. Those are both positives, right? Things to do. And in general, communities that are not mitzvot-driven communities like the positive ones, and we tend to shy away from the negative ones. Maybe we do some of them, but we're gung-ho about the do's and not so good on the not-do's, which I understand. Don't be telling me what I can't do. I understand. But I also think it's part of our unwillingness to yield, to submit, to surrender. Abilities which are curtailed by our dominant modern messages of individualism and unrestricted production and growth, but there is incredible power and possibility in what we're not going to do. I believe on a planetary level, and certainly to change systems of oppression and racism, and in our personal lives, we are now in a period where healing and transformation has in large part to do with not doing, conscious and intentional not doing on purpose, not doing on purpose, personally and collectively. So one not doing we can do is to refrain. The Sabbath, Shabbat, is part of the forming of the world. We're told about the creation of the world, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, so much creating. And then day 7, God ceases. Shabbat, God ceases. And we say in our prayers on Shabbos, Vayachulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'kol tzava'am. God completed the work on the seventh day that God had been doing, and God ceased on the seventh day from the work that God had done. God completed the work on the seventh day. Shabbat, to stop. Well, this raises the question, if everything was complete on the sixth day, then what was the seventh day about? Shabbat turns out to be the pinnacle of creation. The action of ceasing is what is holy on the seventh day. The action of ceasing makes Shabbat. Active not doing, that's how we make Sabbath. It was the first step for God to make Shabbat. God had to Shabbat, cease. And we need to actively cease for what comes next to be possible. In our own personal lives, this is what it looks like. Refraining from saying those words out loud. Refraining from making that call in the middle of the night that you need to not make. Refraining from picking up that drink. Refraining from using weed in that moment when you're running away. Refraining from can take incredible amounts of focus, commitment, and struggle. Refraining from sometimes takes everything in us to not do it. That is ceasing, and that is holy, divine, avodah, worship work to cease. The moment of Shabbat, of letting go, of holding off, of not doing it, can take such incredible focus. And to make the Sabbath, these rabbis who love the profound no, they added all kinds of no's for Sabbath. They said, okay, ceasing, not working. Let's add lots of categories of not work. Anything that was used to make the mishkan in the wilderness, that will all be working. We won't do any of it. Creating the Sabbath, these rabbis, in their own times of crisis and destruction. And here, on Yom Kippur, the Torah tells us, is this day where there's Inui Nefesh. Okay, Inui Nefesh, what's that? An affliction of the soul, that's what we're supposed to be doing today. Just like on Shabbat, the rabbis didn't get much information other than like no fire and no work. So they had to use their divine imaginings. And today, Inui Nefesh, it's listed 5 times in the Torah. So they took each of those 5 times and they said, all right, let's see. How about we don't do some extra things? Like eating and drinking and bathing and sex and wearing leather shoes. Those 5 things, Inui Nefesh. That is how they began when they wanted to create new spiritual practices. What are we not going to do? Profound wisdom in the not doing. Some of you have spent the last month in the spiritual practice of Elul, in an extended Inui Nefesh. You chose for yourself, and I see these head shakings. You chose for yourself an additional practice, something you were going to refrain from for the last month of Elul to bring you to this moment of Yom Kippur. And don't think, oh, I missed that. No, you can always do a 30-day practice of refraining from. Dr. Anna Lemke, the chief of the Stanford Addiction Medicine Dual Diagnosis Clinic, in her book, Dopamine Nation, shares that it's in our neurobiology, this pleasure-pain balance. Our pursuit of pleasure was adapted in early human times for a world of scarcity. We had to have motivation to go and find the food and the drink and to make the babies. Without pain, we wouldn't protect ourselves from injury and death, and so it was in balance. Our pain, pleasure, balance, our neuro set point. Easy to get dopamine hits now. Now, it's not the scarcity. We become endless strivers, never satisfied with what we have now in our modern culture, which tells us always more. Dopamine hits are abundant, and our pleasure-pain balance is thrown off. So much available all the time. This compulsive overconsumption. Compulsive overconsumption, which she names as the dark side of capitalism. We have much to learn from addicts, she tells us. They are the prophets of our time because they have wrestled and identified what needs to happen in order to refrain, in order to come into balance. Refraining, for those of you who have studied Musar with me, you know is a central practice. Anytime we start with one of those midot, okay, we want kindness, we want chesed. Step 1, what are we not going to do? First, let's think about that. Maybe I don't say those unkind things to myself internally or out loud to you. I want to be compassionate. Okay, what are we not going to do? Constantly berate and criticize ourselves and others. Okay, what are we going to refrain from first? If we want compassion and kindness and justice and love, how are we going to refrain first and then do? Doing is, of course, important, but refraining is also doing. So now I am going to refrain from speaking, and you are all going to speak to each other and reflect on this idea of refraining in your personal lives. We're going to go to society next. In this reflection, what can you refrain from? What are you compulsively over-consuming that you can refrain from? You can go that direction. Maybe you spent the last month doing this, so you can tell your partner, I just did this, and here's what I learned, and this is what was so easy. No, usually challenging and things that you learned. Or another take to say, what am I going to refrain from in order to be more kind, compassionate, loving? So if you chose the midah already on Rosh Hashanah, you could say, what are you going to refrain from in order to do it? Or what are you going to just refrain from in terms of compulsive over-consuming? Refraining is the theme you're seeing. So turn to somebody next to you. What are you going to refrain from? What do you need to refrain from? Make sure both people get to speak. Okay, starting to come back. Starting to come back, friends, from your conversation. Yeah, we'll take it a minute or two for everybody to come back. Starting to come back. I very much invite you to spend the rest of the day talking about this. But I want to invite you back, intentionally cutting your conversation off, leaving you, I hope, wanting more. More or less. So that is in your personal lives. I want to also think about our world, our society around us. And I just shared about refraining. The second not doing that I want to share with you is subtracting, actively removing. There's refraining, meaning I'm not going to do it. And then there's subtracting, taking it off altogether. We have a bias in our doing that is also about adding all the time. Laidi Klotz, a multidisciplinary professor and researcher, engineering, architecture, business psychology, at the University of Virginia, is focused on subtraction. And his book, he draws out example after example after example in our society where subtraction, a less thought about option, has led to incredible change. He tells many stories of subtraction, and one of my favorites is about the Embarcadero Freeway in San Francisco. It is not there anymore. Sue Birabin was a community organizing, in her words, a community organizing housewife in San Francisco whose community work over years led to an appointment on the City Planning Commission. And she had for a long time been talking about the Embarcadero Freeway and removing it. And now here she is on the Planning Commission, and the commission did a long, detailed study, what was the best thing to do, and they decided, indeed, the best thing to do was to take out a freeway. Remove it and replace it with waterfront, green space and waterfront. Remove a freeway? Are you crazy? Can you think of that? I mean, as Angelinos, like, remove a freeway? Just that idea, I just want to say, is like part of my nightly meditation now before I go to sleep. I like choose a different freeway in my mind, and then I like remove it, and I like grow things out of it, and it's incredible. If anybody has some trouble falling asleep, let me offer that as a practice. So they responded like many, I think, people in LA would have. San Francisco, they said, you are crazy. And there was absolutely no idea we're doing this. Okay, that's what people said. No, 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 the city said. No, businesses said. No, they said. And they voted in politicians who ran on a platform of we will not get rid of the Embarcadero Freeway. And then there was the Loma Prieta earthquake. And the Bray Bridge had a dangerous collapse. The Embarcadero Freeway did not collapse, but it was not safe. And then they were like, wait a second, wasn't there that plan? We could rebuild it like we did the Bay Bridge one, or we could get rid of it. And that is what they did. They got rid of a freeway. They got rid of a freeway and replaced it with waterfront. Housing went up, as did jobs in the area, and everyone found a different way to get around the city. He also talks about the movement to divest from apartheid South Africa. He talks about the modern brick for making homes. Bricks used to be all the way full, and then they figured out you could keep the structure and take out the whole insides. Subtraction, boycotting, striking, strategies that are about we're not going to do it. It's a very less often taken path that can lead to tremendous change, and it is one tool. And it is one tool that we really can use right now. What if we didn't? What if we took it out? How many of you spend time in brainstorming sessions in like your work or your political and community organizing, or in making new artistic pieces? And we're always supposed to come up with new ideas, brainstorm. What if some of the brainstorming is, what are we taking out? What could we subtract? We all know that that's what happens in editing. You think everything you wrote was amazing, but really it's more amazing when you take stuff out, right? It's all over the place, yet we don't think of subtraction. And also I want to say, subtraction's not just not taking something else on. So in the process of his research, Leidy, the author, says that somebody ran up to him who was working with him on the research and said, hey, you'll be really proud of me. The department head asked me to do something and I felt really overwhelmed, and I said, no, I'm not going to take on an additional task. And he said, yeah, that's great. You didn't take on an additional task. That's not the same as subtracting something from what you already had. During the active quarantine period, when we had to be inside, there was what is called an anthropause. Humans were in an anthropause. And now that there's been a little space, researchers are beginning to compile data about how that was like. What was that like for the other species who we do share this earth with? Sometimes we forget that. An anthropause, what did it give these species? And it turns out that on the whole, it was pretty darn good. But that's not the whole story, because it was also nuanced. In areas where we were being good custodians of the earth and its animals and plants, it actually did not have a good effect for us to go away. So an example, there was a long-planned project to get rid of giant predatory mice from Gough Island, and a critical habitat for threatened seabirds in the South Atlantic Ocean. And because of the quarantine, we couldn't do that project. Let me just note that humans introduced the mice in the 19th century, and they attacked these bird chicks. Where my family is from in New Zealand, it's an incredible issue because all of the animals there were no mammals in New Zealand. Only one was a bat. Everything else were not mammals. And then with colonizers came rats and stoats and all of these animals that laid their eggs, like the kiwi lays its eggs in the ground. And it has been tremendous, these animals that have been introduced. So in places where we're trying to repair some harm, it was not good that we went away. But in other places where we went away, it was actually very helpful. So in moving forward out of the quarantine time, looking at, in Hawaii, at the Hanauma Bay Nature Preserve, they found that in the anthropause, the water clarity improved, fish density, biomass, and diversity increased. So now they have a strict cap on visitors, and they are subtracting 2 days a week. They are not open every day. Anthropulse is the pulse of humanity in nature. The pulse of humans in nature, in relationship to the species around us. We are not going away, so it is a choice for us to shift into an anthropulse that is aware of the earth around us, and that from time to time, yes, indeed, does subtract ourselves. I remember hearing an interview that sparked this thought for me this summer. It was like this woman was just being interviewed about some climate change stuff on the radio, and it just happened to be a moment where she was frustrated, and the reporter said, "What should we do?" She was like, "I don't know. I mean, why does everybody always ask what to do? How about stop doing things? How about, like, don't build your houses into places where there's nature, and, like, don't make addition." Like, she just sort of went off, and then she was like, "I'm sorry." And I was like, wow, that was amazing. What do we need to not do? It's not about, obviously, leaving somebody alone who's suffering and needs you to be active in helping. Of course not. But there are many, many areas in our personal lives where subtraction can make a difference, and it is often something we do not think about and do not make happen. The movement for Black Lives, M4BL, is a coalition of many Black organizations that came together to discuss, debate, and develop shared assessments of what political interventions are necessary to achieve key policy, political, and cultural wins. There's many organizations that have the word Black Lives in it. This is specific, the movement for Black Lives. They bring together organizational leadership in order to debate and co-create a shared movement-wide strategy. And in their Breathe Act platform, with many legislative proposals and beyond, their language in the platform is this: divest in order to invest. Divest in order to invest. We have to first stop doing what we are doing in order to invest, in order to create the changes we need. We personally need this, and our world needs this. If we want to change the course of where we are headed, we have to stop doing and also do. And often our stop doing leads to ways of doing we have not thought of before. The question I'm going to give you now, I want for you to talk about in the break. The question is this: what can you actively subtract to help others, to help our planet? Maybe you don't know yet. Like, I haven't thought about this subtraction thing before. Okay. But we can begin to take a moment together to wonder about it. How can we actively subtract to make our society, to make our planet, to make our lives better? It is overwhelming to think of the threats to our planet. And I'm looking out and I'm seeing some of you who are devoting your lives to this. And I know from talking to you and being your spiritual support that this can be so overwhelming. And I want to say to you and to all of us that I know that we can make the changes we need culturally and in our institutions and personally and as a species to change. My husband calls me an apocalyptimist. I am not unaware of reality. I am aware of reality and in deep and profound belief of how we can change. How we can change. And of course, before I end, I must say, yes, it's not just us personally, Rabbi. There's corporations. Yes, there's corporations. I mean, believe me, the taking out of the Freeway thing is to try and replace those images of all that DDT that they dumped in our oceans right off our coast. There's so much of it, barrels and barrels and barrels of it, that these corporations thought they could just dump into the ocean. I know that there's so much of accountability for corporations, but we have power as citizenry to do things, to create things, and also, get ready for this, I like this, Michael Pollan says this, we can create taboos. That's the not doings. We can create things that we do, and we also get to say, oh, we don't do that. We absolutely won't do that. So friends, to the profound no that we all of us need in our lives, may this be a year where each of us find a profound no for our personal lives, for our society, for dismantling systems of oppression, for healing our planet, so that we can get to the yes, 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 yes. Shana Tova.